It began with the smallest sound, the scrape of a chair against my kitchen floor. I had heard that noise all my life, but that night it carried a strange edge like something final. The room smelled of roasted vegetables and burnt sugar from the apple pie cooling on the counter. I remember thinking it should have been a peaceful evening. It should have been ordinary. Instead, my son looked at me as if I had failed some invisible test. Ethan leaned against the counter, wine glass half full, his tie loosened after the drive from the city. He had that posture of someone who believed he owned the room, even when the room was mine. The candlelight flickered across his face, and for a moment I saw the boy he used to be. Then the man he had become took his place. "Mom," he said, swirling the wine. "I wish Margot had been the one who raised me. Maybe then I'd know what class really looks like." The words didn't hit right away. They floated in the air, soft at first, before settling deep enough to sting. I looked at him, waiting for a grin, for some sign that he was joking. But he wasn't. He looked proud of the sentence, as if it had been waiting on his tongue for years. "Margot," I repeated, more to taste the name than to question it. "Your mother-in-law." He nodded, casual, almost relieved to say it aloud. "She just knows how to handle herself. You should see her at events. People listen when she speaks. She has presence." I turned back to the counter and wiped an invisible crumb from the surface. My hands have always given me away. They tremble when I'm angry. But that night they were still. I studied the small scratches on the table, the faded spots on the wallpaper. Everything in that kitchen told a story of endurance, not elegance. "Presence," I said quietly. "That's an expensive thing to learn." "Don't start," he sighed. "I'm not criticizing you. I'm just saying Margot's different. She knows how to live. You've spent your whole life just getting by. Getting by. As if survival was shameful." I wanted to remind him who paid his college tuition, who kept the lights on, who pawned her wedding ring to cover his first apartment deposit. But something inside me stopped. The voice that had always rushed to defend itself went silent. I felt the world narrow to a single point, the space between us, and the sound of my heartbeat echoing in my ears. "I'll keep that in mind," I said. "Thank you for your honesty." He frowned, confused by my calmness. "Mom, that's not what I meant." "Oh, I think you meant it exactly." We stood there in silence. The clock above the stove ticked loudly, measuring the distance growing between us. "Can we just have one dinner without turning it into drama?" he muttered. "Of course," I said and smiled. "Next time, maybe Margot can host." He hesitated, sensing the chill beneath my voice, then shook his head and reached for his coat. The smell of his cologne lingered long after he left. When the door closed, the house felt cavernous, the kind of silence that doesn't fade, it settles. I sat down at the table, staring at the two plates, the wine stain spreading across the tablecloth like a slow wound. I traced it with my finger, remembering the years of cleaning other people's kitchens while he was away at school. The nights I fell asleep at my desk so his tuition checks wouldn't bounce. The way I used to imagine him walking into my home someday grateful. Instead, he had arrived with judgment disguised as sophistication. Outside, snow began to fall. I watched the flakes slide against the window and thought about how snow never argues, never apologizes. It just covers everything until the world forgets what's underneath. I whispered to the empty room. "You wanted class, my dear boy. Let's see how much it costs you." That night I didn't cry. I thought I would, but tears require hope, and I had run out of that years ago. I stayed in my chair until dawn, watching the kitchen fade from shadow to gray light. When the sun rose, I brewed coffee and drank it black. The bitterness suited me. I opened my old notebook and tore out a clean page. Across the top I wrote a single line. "To understand what makes her so perfect." The words looked harmless on paper, but they hummed with quiet electricity. I had no clear plan, only a pulse of curiosity that felt sharper than anger. I spent the rest of the morning on my laptop. Margot Elinwood's life unfolded in glossy photographs and curated captions. Her charity galas, her designer clothes, her holiday parties with imported champagne. Her smile was symmetrical, practiced, but when I zoomed in on one picture, I noticed a tension in her eyes, like someone holding her breath. I kept scrolling. There was a photograph of her with Ethan and Clara, all three of them standing in front of a marble staircase. Ethan looked proud beside her. his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. I wasn't in the picture, of course. I hadn't been invited to that event. By the time I closed the laptop, the decision had already been made. Revenge doesn't always start with rage. Sometimes it begins with silence, with a thought whispered so softly that even you don't believe it yet. But I believed it. That evening, as I washed the dishes from the night before, I realized something had shifted inside me permanently. I wasn't the woman waiting by the phone anymore. I wasn't the mother hoping for appreciation. I was something else now, something colder, sharper, steadier. They say some people are born with fire in their veins. I wasn't. I was born with frost. And frost given time can crack stone. The next morning I went to the library where I worked 3 days a week. It wasn't much of a job, checking out books, fixing torn covers, stacking shelves, but it offered something more valuable than a paycheck. Silence. From behind the counter I could watch people without being seen. It was a habit I'd learned long ago, back when survival depended on observation. Most people think of libraries as peaceful places. They don't realize how much truth hides between whispers and turning pages. That day, while the rest of the staff chatted about weekend plans, I opened my notebook again. On the top of a new page, I wrote her name in neat block letters. Margot Elinwood. Underneath, I drew 3 lines branching out: career, marriage, reputation. Each word felt like a doorway waiting to be unlocked. By noon, I was already gathering pieces. A local business journal had profiled her last year as one of the women redefining luxury real estate. Her photo smiled from the page. Impeccable hair, pearls, confidence painted like armor. The article praised her for balancing career and family with effortless grace. Effortless. That word always makes me suspicious. Nothing graceful is effortless. Not love. Not motherhood. Not success. When my shift ended, I walked home through the early snow. The streets were empty, the sky the color of tin. I thought about Margot's world of cocktail parties and designer coats, and how far it was from my own. But envy wasn't what I felt. It was curiosity, the kind that hums just before a storm. That night I searched deeper. Public records, property listings, archived news. Her name appeared everywhere. But the pattern didn't make sense. Houses bought and sold too quickly. Mortgages refinanced more than once. Loans closed and reopened within months. There was motion but not progress. It looked like someone swimming just to keep from sinking. I took notes, filled pages with connections and question marks. It felt almost scientific the way I dissected her life. And the more I learned, the less perfect she became. 3 days later, I decided to call in a favor. Miles Harker owed me one. He had been married to a friend from the library board, a kind woman who discovered her husband's affair through a credit card statement. I was the one who helped her hide the evidence before confronting him. When their marriage ended, Miles sent me a handwritten note. Half apology, half gratitude. I still kept it. So when I called him, he didn't sound surprised. "It's been a while, Winter. What can I do for you?" I told him the truth, or enough of it. "There's a woman I need to know more about." Discreetly. He chuckled. "You've always had a poetic way of saying revenge." "I didn't say revenge," I replied. "I said I need to know." He agreed to meet for coffee the next morning. When I arrived, the cafe smelled of cinnamon and rain-wet wool. Miles sat by the window, older than I remembered but with the same calm eyes of someone who had seen too much and stopped pretending to be shocked by it. "So," he said, opening a small notebook, "who are we digging into?" I slid a photo across the table. Margot at a charity gala, wrapped in silver silk, holding a flute of champagne like a trophy. "She's my son's mother-in-law," I said. "He thinks she's everything I'm not." "That sounds dangerous," Miles murmured. "For whom?" "I suppose we'll find out." He studied me for a moment, then nodded. "What do you want to know?" "Everything she hides when she smiles." He wrote that down word for word. When I returned home, the house felt different. Lighter somehow. The kind of calm that follows a decision made too quietly to undo. I cleaned the kitchen, scrubbed the counters until they gleamed. The order soothed me. Every dish back in its place, every surface wiped clean. It was as if by restoring control here, I was reclaiming it everywhere else. As I worked, my mind wandered to Ethan. I wondered if he was sleeping soundly beside his polished wife, if he still believed class could be learned by imitation. I thought about the irony. How he, who once mocked my thriftiness, had built his success on the money I loaned him, the home I mortgaged for his future. He hadn't paid me back a cent. The realization no longer hurt. It clarified. The things we give freely are the ones people learn to disrespect. The phone rang, breaking my thoughts. It was Miles. You were right to ask, he said without greeting. Her life doesn't add up. I'll need a week, maybe 2. Take your time, I replied. Accuracy matters more than speed. After we hung up, I stood at the window and watched the snow thicken. Each flake fell without hesitation, covering everything, erasing lines and footprints. There was a strange comfort in that. That night, I opened my old box of photographs. Ethan at 5, wearing a paper crown from his birthday cake. Ethan at 10, holding a basketball too big for his hands. Ethan at 22, cap and gown, smiling for a camera I couldn't afford. Each picture carried a weight I hadn't felt before. Not love exactly, but a reminder of the debt love can create. I traced his face with my fingertip and whispered to the image, "You wanted class, my boy. I'll teach you what it looks like when the masks fall." Then I slipped the photo back into the box and turned off the light. The wind outside had picked up, howling softly through the gaps in the window frame. Somewhere in the distance a train horn echoed, lonely and long. For the first time in years I felt alive, not happy, not hopeful, but awake. The ache that used to fill my chest was gone, replaced by purpose. Revenge, I realized, doesn't burn. Chills. And in that coldness I finally found peace. A week passed before Miles called again. I had almost grown used to the stillness that came after our last talk, the hush of waiting. The phone rang while I was folding laundry, the sound slicing through the monotony like a blade. "I found something," he said. He didn't elaborate, and that alone told me enough. We met the next morning in the same cafe, the one that smelled of cinnamon and regret. Miles slid a manila folder across the table. It was thicker than I expected. "She's clean on the surface," he said. "But dig a little and the ground's soft." Inside were printed pages. Financial records, clippings, addresses, a few photographs. In one, Margot stood beside a man I didn't recognize, her hand resting on his arm, her smile polished. The caption beneath read, "Margot Elinwood with business partner Daniel Rains, 2012. She wasn't always in Elinwood," Miles said. 10 years ago she was Margot Keene. Before that Margot Lane. Same woman, different lives. Bankruptcy filings, small claims suits, a trail of failed ventures. She's reinvented herself at least 3 times. I turned the photo over. Does her husband know? Hard to say. But she's careful. Every time she starts over she changes cities, friends, even her accent. I stared at the papers until the words blurred. It was one thing to suspect artifice, another to see it catalogued, stamped, and dated. Margot Elinwood, the woman who lectured me about refinement, was a collection of borrowed names. Miles leaned forward. "What do you plan to do with this?" "Nothing yet," I said. "Sometimes truth works best when it ripens on its own." He smiled faintly. "You always had a poetic cruelty." I slipped the folder into my bag. "It's not cruelty. It's education." Outside, the city was gray and cold. I walked for blocks without direction, the wind biting my cheeks. Part of me wanted to rush home, call Ethan, and throw the truth in his face. But timing mattered. Truth released too early becomes noise. Released too late, it loses impact. It had to arrive when he needed it most, when his faith in her was absolute. That night, I printed one of Margot's photographs and pinned it to my kitchen wall. It was the same image from a charity event. Her laughing under fairy lights, unaware of the cracks beneath her feet. I sat at the table and stared at her face until the laughter in the picture began to look strained. The next day I attended one of Clara's art show openings. I told myself it was for support, though curiosity was the real reason. The gallery was bright and loud, filled with people who spoke in half sentences and laughed too quickly. Margot arrived halfway through, wrapped in a red coat that drew every eye. She moved like someone performing a part she'd rehearsed for years. When she spotted me, her smile tightened. "Winter," she said, surprised but too polished to show annoyance. "How lovely to see you here." "I wouldn't miss my daughter-in-law's work," I said. "Clara's pieces are beautiful." "They are," she agreed. "She's finally learning to refine her taste." The insult was wrapped in silk as always. I returned her smile. You must be proud, Margot. Reinvention suits your family. For a second, something flickered behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe fear. Then she laughed, soft and false. Reinvention? You make it sound like a scandal. Isn't it? I asked, but gently, as if it were an innocent joke. She excused herself soon after, her hand trembling slightly as she lifted her glass. I watched her retreat, the perfect posture slipping for just a heartbeat before she disappeared into the crowd. When I got home, I called Miles again. She's starting to sense the wind, I said. He chuckled. You've always liked a slow game. Patience, I replied. It's the only luxury I can afford. Over the next days, I let small things happen. Anonymous comments on social media questioning her old business ventures. An email forwarded to one of her investors linking a forgotten article about Margot Lane's bankruptcy. Nothing direct, nothing that traced back to me. Just enough to plant doubt. I wasn't trying to destroy her yet. I was only loosening the soil around her roots. Each evening I'd return to my quiet kitchen, light a single candle, and review the day's ripples. Ethan hadn't called in weeks. I knew he and Clara were busy pretending their marriage was perfect, but I also knew how quickly perfection bruised. One night, I received a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. M. I stared at it for a long time before deleting it. That same night I dreamed of snow again. Thicker, heavier, covering everything until the world went quiet. I woke before dawn, my heart steady, my mind clear. Margot Elinwood was beginning to crack, and I hadn't even touched her yet. 3 days after her message, Margot arrived at my door without warning. She stood on the porch with a smile that showed too many teeth, her red coat bright against the dull winter morning. I let her in because we were both women who understood courtesy as a weapon. She walked around my kitchen with the careful interest of a buyer inspecting a house she had no intention of purchasing. Her fingers drifted over the back of a chair, the edge of a frame, the rim of my clean sink. This place is very you, she said, as if that were a diagnosis. Tea? I asked. She nodded and sat, crossing her legs at the ankle. She was beautiful in a way that photographers love. Lines that could be lit into kindness or power. I boiled water and listened to the tick of the stove clock, to the faint whisper of her perfume moving through my home like a guest who had stayed too long. When I placed the cup in front of her, she did not reach for it. My reputation means a great deal to me, Winter, she began. I imagine you can understand that. I am not sure mine has ever been valuable enough to protect, I said. But I am listening. She held my gaze. Someone has been asking questions. Old names. Old years. There is a man, an investigator of some kind, calling people who do not appreciate being called. I would like to know if you are involved. Are you asking me to confess? I said. Or to absolve you of something that happened when you were someone else? Her smile did not move. Only the eyes shifted, a small shadow drifting across the surface. She stirred the tea, though she had not added sugar. Ethan is ambitious, she said. He is finally learning how to move through the world. I would hate to see his momentum hindered by a misunderstanding between the women in his life. I thought of the years she had not been there. The sandwiches cut into stars so a small boy would eat. The way I would set an extra plate at the table sometimes, as if a father might appear by magic and claim a seat. I thought of the second mortgage and the letter from the bank and the silent prayer that someone was listening who could forgive what I could not. I do not misunderstand you, Margot, I said gently. I understand you perfectly. She lifted her cup and took a small sip, then stood. Let us keep this civil. There is room for all of us. There is always room, I said. The question is who pays the rent. She left with the same careful posture she had brought in with her. The scent of her perfume lingered after the door closed, sweet and faintly medicinal. That afternoon Miles called with a measured voice I had learned to trust. Her firm has begun an internal review, he said. Someone sent them a packet of public records. No signature. No return address. Imagine that, I said. They will not fire her, he went on. Not yet. But they will watch her. Investors will hear. People will take longer to return calls. Good, I said, and felt no triumph, only a small release, The way a tight knot loosens when you work it with patient fingers. That evening I walked to the market. Snow had crusted into thin ridges along the curb, and the sky had the flat color of old paper. I bought eggs and bread and the cheapest red wine because I liked the way it warmed the throat. On the way home I passed a boutique with a dress in the window, silk the color of stormwater. I stood outside for a long time, watching the fabric move in the weak heat from the display lights, and thought about the first time I had felt truly poor. It was not when I counted coins for rent. It was the day I realized that some rooms listen only to expensive fabrics. I tucked my scarf closer and kept walking. The next week was a study in small storms. At Clara's studio opening, a woman in pearls approached me while studying a painting. She spoke in the soft tone that rich women use when they think they are being kind. She asked how long I had lived in the neighborhood. She asked how often I saw my son. Then she asked if I knew that Margot had run a gallery once years ago in another city. I said I did not. The woman said it closed very suddenly after a disagreement with a partner. She said it the way people mention weather. Then she moved away, already bored with her own sentence. At the club where Margot lunched with donors, a waiter spilled sparkling water on the table. It was nothing. A napkin, an apology, a smile. But I watched from the street as she flinched, and I knew that she was starting to live at the edge of a cliff she could not see. Ethan called on a Sunday evening. The sky outside my window was lavender and thin. I could hear Clara in the background saying something about a delivery. "Mom," he said, too casual. "Have you talked to Margot recently?" "Yes," I said. "She thinks someone is trying to smear her. Some old business rival. People can be jealous." He cleared his throat. "She is worried you might be pulled into it. She does not want you bothered." "How kind," I said. "And you?" He paused. "I just do not want drama." I thought of the night in my kitchen, of the sentence that had turned my heart into glass. I pictured him standing where he had stood, wine red in his glass like a confession. "Then you should choose calmer company," I said, and we let the moment pass us like a slow train, heavy and inevitable. The following day I sent an envelope to a journalist who wrote polite profiles about powerful people. Inside I placed 3 items. A clipped announcement from a city paper about a gallery closure. A page from a bankruptcy docket with a name that was no longer hers. A photograph of a ribbon cutting where Margot stood at the edge, smiling too hard while a partner held the giant scissors. I did not include a letter. The facts were sufficient. I did not expect a story. I only wanted him to start keeping a file. 2 nights later I found myself awake at 3 in the morning. The house had that deep silence old places get when the heat is off and the pipes are thinking. I made tea and sat at the table with the lights down low. Across from me, the printed photo of Margot glowed faintly where the street lamp bled through the curtain. I tried to imagine the younger faces that belonged to her other names. I wondered what those women had wanted. Love perhaps. Or a door she could not open with the keys she had. I do not believe people change without cost. I believe we shed our names like skins when the past begins to itch. Miles sent a message the next morning. 1 sentence. Investors asking questions. She will feel it. That afternoon I went to the park and sat on a bench where the light through the bare branches made a trembling pattern on the snow. A child in a bright hat fell, then laughed. His father lifted him easily, the kind of lift a man learns when he has done it many times and plans to do it for many more. I watched them leave a set of prints that matched, big and small, side by side. I told myself I had no use for envy. I was not sure I believed me. When evening came I ironed a plain dress and went to a small charity dinner where I knew Margot would be the guest that everyone wanted to be seen noticing. The room was warm and full of clatter. Candles made everyone look softer. She was already seated, ringed by the sort of people who applaud first and ask later. She saw me as I entered and her expression flattened by the smallest degree, like wind pressed against glass. During dessert a man with a layout of glossy hair asked Margot about her early career. It was harmless chatter, but the question slipped and landed wrong. He asked if she had always been in this city. He asked if she had always been in Elinwood. The table went quiet for a breath. Then the conversation veered. Too quickly. A practiced swerve. I left before coffee. On the sidewalk the air was sharp and clean, and the stars looked close enough to pick. I breathed until the sweetness of the evening drained out and the world felt simple again. Street. Snow. Breath. At home I wrote a single line at the bottom of my notebook page beneath her name and the 3 branches. The ground is soft. Apply pressure. Then I closed the book and turned out the light, and the house settled around me the way water closes over a stone. Margot would wake to more questions tomorrow. She would call friends who returned calls too slowly. She would draft a post that sounded like grace and read like fear. Somewhere in a newsroom a file would be opened with her photograph paper clipped to the first page. Somewhere in a boardroom a man would say the word stability and someone else would pretend not to hear. The perfect woman was cracking. The sound was not loud. It was steady, and I had not even raised my voice. Rumors move like smoke. They begin thin, almost invisible, and then they fill every corner before anyone notices the air has changed. A week after that dinner, the first trace reached me through the library gossip chain. Someone in the business district was asking if Margot Elanwood had ever been known by another name. By afternoon a second thread appeared online. An anonymous account dropping polite questions under her charity posts. Nothing sharp, nothing direct, just enough to bend the light. I didn't post them myself. I only watched. That evening I met Miles on the river walk. The water was dark, the current slow under a sheet of ice. He lit a cigarette and said, "She's flinching." "How bad?" "Her office has begun scrubbing old web pages. She's called a crisis consultant. That means she's scared, but still believes she can fix it." I nodded. Good. Fear makes people tidy. Tidy people leave tracks. We walked for a while without talking. The lamps threw long thin shadows on the pavement. Somewhere across the river a train horn sounded distant and tired. When I got home, Ethan's name was glowing on my phone. I let it ring twice before I answered. "Mom? Clara says you were at that charity thing last week." I was. He hesitated. "Margot said you've been curious about her past." "Curious?" I said. "That's a generous word. She's upset. These rumors could hurt her business." "And you called to defend her honor?" "I'm asking you not to make this worse." I smiled even though he couldn't see it. "Don't worry, Ethan. Worse takes care of itself." He hung up first. I stood there for a moment, phone warm in my hand, the silence thick enough to taste. Later that night I opened my notebook. Beneath the ground is soft. Apply pressure. I drew a single arrow downward and wrote, "Continue until fracture." 2 days later I saw her again. Margot was at the same cafe where Miles and I usually met, sitting by the window with a man I recognized from a real estate magazine. Her smile looked perfect from a distance, but her hand kept sliding to her necklace, twisting it around one finger until the chain caught the light. Every few seconds she glanced toward the door. I bought a coffee I didn't need and sat where she could see me. When our eyes met, she froze for a fraction of a second, then offered a smile too quick, too polite. I raised my cup in greeting. She didn't stay long. The man gathered his papers, she whispered something, and they left together. I waited 5 minutes before following. Outside, the wind had teeth. I watched them part at the corner. He turned east, she west, her pace faster than comfort allowed. She checked her phone twice in half a block. I knew that rhythm. Someone scanning for danger without admitting it exists. That night Miles called again. "You've started a fire, Winter." "She's running damage control, but the firm's board has requested a background audit. It won't stay quiet." "Then it's almost time," I said. "For what?" "For her to ask me for mercy." He exhaled smoke through the receiver. "You're colder than the river tonight." "I was named for the season," I reminded him. After we hung up, I sat by the window and watched the streetlights blur through frost. In the reflection I saw my own face doubled, one half calm, the other almost curious. It struck me how easily righteousness can dress itself as purpose. I thought of Ethan. I imagined him sitting at Margot's polished table, listening to her stories about taste and refinement. I wondered if he could sense the tremor in her voice yet. Probably not. He had always mistaken control for strength. At midnight I drafted a short email from a new account, one that could have belonged to any anonymous admirer of truth. It contained no threats, only a question sent to her firm's HR director. "Is it standard policy to employ executives who have filed for bankruptcy under another name?" I sent it, deleted the address, and closed the laptop. When the kettle clicked off, I poured hot water over a tea bag and let the steam rise against my face. The window glass fogged, and for a moment I traced a circle in the mist with my finger. Inside that small ring of clarity the world looked distant and harmless. Tomorrow I knew the circle would widen. The story did not break all at once. It arrived like drizzle, a fine sheet that soaks before anyone reaches for an umbrella. First there was a podcast that loved success stories and loved unraveling them even more. They asked a delicate question about the origins of Margot Elinwood. They did not accuse. They wondered. That was enough. At the library the next morning, 2 regulars whispered at the returns desk. They were kind women who always used lotion on their hands and kindness in their voices. Today their voices had a new softness, the kind you reserve for neighbors whose secrets have been discovered. I stamped due dates and said nothing. Silence, I had learned, is a net. Catches everything that falls. By noon my phone buzzed. Clara. She almost never called me directly. I stepped into the staff hallway where the vending machine hummed like a sleeping animal. Are you busy? She asked. Always, I said. What do you need? She breathed out through her nose. We are having a small gathering tonight. Friends from the gallery. You should come. It would mean a lot to Ethan. I waited for the other reason. It came dressed as an afterthought. My mother will be there. I will bring a pie, I said. The pie cooled on the counter while the afternoon light slid off the rooftops. I tied my scarf and walked the 12 blocks to their townhouse. Through the front window I could see a cluster of people moving like reflections in a lake. Glasses up. Laughter high. The music too low to have a rhythm. Ethan opened the door before I knocked. He kissed my cheek quickly and took the pie as if it were a fragile package he planned to forget on a table. Thanks for coming, Mom. Your house looks beautiful, I said. We stepped inside. The room smelled of cedar and new money. Margot stood near the fireplace in a dress the color of wet stone. When she saw me her face smoothed itself into welcome. She crossed the room and took my hands in both of hers as if we were old friends who had never been enemies. Winter, she said. How lovely. You look well, I said. For a while the conversation skimmed along the surface. People asked me how I liked the neighborhood and I told them I liked the sound of trains at night. Someone asked Ethan about his latest campaign, and he spoke with the shine in his voice he saves for clients. Clara floated between groups, placing a perfect smile on each set of faces like a label on a jar. Then a man with a magazine smile asked Margot where she grew up. He said it lightly, as if the question were a compliment. She paused a hair too long. There are several places that feel like home, she said. I moved around. My father worked in development. Which company? The man asked, still cheerful. She named one I knew had never employed a man by her father's name. I knew this because Miles had sent me a list. The lie passed without friction. The room let it go because rooms like this are built to forgive the beautiful. Later I found myself alone in the kitchen with Ethan. He rinsed 2 wine glasses without looking at me. The sound of water on crystal was small and clean. How are you? He asked. I am as you left me, I said. He turned off the tap. Mom, please. Not tonight. Not tonight, I agreed. Then I touched the rim of a glass and added, she is good at answering questions with decorations. He dried his hands on a towel. She has worked hard for what she has. People love to tear down what they admire. Do they? I said. Or do they simply want the truth that was not offered? Before he could answer, Clara walked in and placed a hand on his arm. The gesture was careful. She looked at me as if I were a small storm she hoped would pass over the house without noticing the roof. We are about to cut the cake, she said. We returned to the living room. Someone made a toast to resilience. Someone else praised authenticity. Words shuffled around each other like polite dancers who did not wish to sweat. I was leaving my empty glass on a side table when a woman I did not know touched my sleeve. She leaned close, the way strangers do when they are about to ask forgiveness for a cruel question. Is it true, she whispered, that Margot once ran a gallery in Detroit under another name? I looked at her. Why would you ask me? She glanced toward Margot, then back at me. You have her eyes when you listen, she said, and drifted away. On the walk home the snow had begun again, finer than the flour on my counter, bright under the street lamps. I thought of that woman's sentence. You have her eyes when you listen. It was wrong, of course. Margot listened to be adored. I listened to be precise. At dawn Miles texted me a single line. The board wants an external review. Investors are skittish. Good, I typed back. Let them practice caution. I did not go back to sleep. Instead, I opened the box of photographs again and spread them on the table like cards. In each picture, Ethan was becoming the man who had stood in my kitchen and measured me against the shine of another woman. I tried to decide which frame held the first shadow of that man. I could not. Shadows belong to the room as much as to the figure. By afternoon, the podcast posted a second episode. They were patient and respectful. They used phrases like public interest and verification. They included an interview with a quiet voice that belonged to a former partner in a closed venture. He did not accuse. He said the numbers had never loved them back. That evening, Ethan called. His voice had a weight to it that had not been there the night before. Mom, have you been talking to anyone? I talk to people every day, I said. Librarians are professional listeners. He did not laugh. This thing with Margot is getting out of hand. Reporters are sniffing around. Clara is upset. Upset that they are asking, I said, or upset that they might find. He exhaled. Can you please tell me you are not involved? I thought about all the years I had told him exactly what he wanted to hear. I thought of the first time he lied to me about a broken window and the way I pretended to believe him because I could not afford the repair and he could not afford the lesson. No, I said. I cannot tell you that. Silence held us apart for a long moment. Finally he said, why? Because you wished for a different mother, I answered. I am showing you what it costs to be raised by a woman the world respects. He hung up without saying my name. That night I walked to the river. The ice was breaking in long, slow sighs. A fox crossed the path ahead of me and did not startle. The city lights looked like a string of coins tossed carelessly into the dark. When I returned home, there was an envelope propped against my door. No return address. Inside, a single page printed with care. It was a cease and desist from a law firm known for its immaculate stationery. The letter did not accuse me directly. It warned the universe. It asked anyone who might be spreading unfounded rumors about Mrs. Elinwood to consider the legal consequences of envy. I set the letter on the table and made tea. When the steam rose, I held the page above it until the fibers loosened and the paper curved like a tired leaf. Then I laid it flat and wrote one sentence at the bottom in pencil. Envy does not keep records. I do. In the morning, the journalist I had fed with clippings sent a polite message. He could not confirm the gallery story, he said. But he had confirmed the bankruptcy and the earlier name. He was not publishing yet. He was waiting for comment. He asked if I would be willing to be quoted as a family friend. I wrote back. I am not her friend. I am the mother of the man who believed her performance. Print that when you can prove everything else. Then I closed the laptop and stood very still in the kitchen. The house breathed around me. In that quiet I could hear it at last, faint but real, the sound I had been working toward from the first line in my notebook. Not a crash. Not yet. Crack. 2 days after the letter arrived, I heard that Margot had taken a leave of absence from her firm. Officially it was for personal health reasons, though the statement they released was more like an obituary for trust. Clients were assured that her projects would continue seamlessly under interim leadership. The newspapers printed a flattering photo beside the article, but even the camera could not hide the tension in her smile. The story was already everywhere before I could decide how to feel. I had wanted to see her falter, not crumble. Yet watching it unfold, I realized that destruction rarely looks satisfying when it finally arrives. Just looks quiet. At the library, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. For the first time, I saw what Ethan must have seen that night. The faint brittleness around my mouth, the distance in my eyes. I wondered when I had stopped expecting kindness from anyone. The phone rang at noon. I knew before answering that it would be him. Mom, he said, no greeting, just that heavy voice that comes when a man is holding something broken. What did you do? You'll have to be specific, I said. She's being investigated, he said. Some anonymous person sent documents to the firm and to the press. Old filings, business names, things no one should have. And you think I have them? I don't know what to think anymore. Then perhaps you should start there, I said, and hung up before he could beg or threaten. I made tea and sat at the table. Outside, the snow had begun again, heavier this time, as if the sky were tired of keeping secrets. That evening Miles called. It's happening faster than I expected, he said. She's selling assets, moving accounts. Someone must have warned her how deep this could go. She'll try to survive, I said. It's her best talent. He hesitated. And Ethan. He'll survive too. But not as easily. Later I walked to the park. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, but I liked the honesty of the cold. Across the street a group of children were building a lopsided snowman, their laughter bright and reckless. I tried to remember when I had last laughed like that, but the memory wouldn't come. When I returned home, there was a message from Clara. She's not well, it read. Please, if you know anything, stop this. I stared at the words for a long time before deleting them. Mercy, I thought, is only a virtue when it's not mistaken for weakness. The next morning Ethan appeared at my door. He looked older than his years, coat unbuttoned, eyes red from lack of sleep. May I come in? He asked. It's your house too, I said, though it wasn't true anymore. He sat at the kitchen table, the same place where it had all begun. The silence stretched until it threatened to snap. Margot is losing everything, he said finally. She's terrified. Do you have any idea what this is doing to her? Probably the same thing her words did to me, I said. Only slower. He ran a hand through his hair. You can't compare the two. You're right, I said. She had power when she hurt me. I have patience. He looked up then, and for the first time in months, I saw fear in his eyes. Not of me, but of the possibility that he had misjudged everything. Tell me the truth, he said. Did you do this? I met his gaze without blinking. If you want to know who destroyed her life, look at the woman who taught you to despise your own blood. He swallowed hard. I don't recognize you anymore. That's because you're finally seeing me clearly. He left without another word. When the door closed, I let the silence settle again. Thick as snow. For a moment I felt something close to regret, but regret is a luxury I no longer afford myself. That night, the news reported that Margot Elinwood had been admitted to St. Clair's Hospital, after what they called an episode of stress-related collapse. I watched the anchor describe her condition with professional pity. Somewhere behind the sterile language was the simple truth. She had broken. I turned off the television and whispered, "Now we're even." The next morning Miles arrived with 2 coffees and a look that was neither pride nor pity. "You've won," he said. "Does it feel like victory?" I thought about it. "It feels like silence," I said. "And that's enough." He nodded slowly. "Careful, Winter. Silence has teeth. If you feed it too long, it starts to eat." After he left, I walked through each room of my house, touching the furniture, the framed photos, the worn edges of my life. Everything was where it had always been, yet nothing felt familiar. I had wanted justice, but what I had built was an echo, loud, empty, and unstoppable. That night I dreamed of the first time Ethan called me Mom, without asking for anything. He was 5 and I had fixed the hole in his blanket. In the dream he turned toward me with that same child's smile, but when I reached out, the face looking back was Margot's. I woke before dawn, heart pounding, hands cold. Outside the snow had stopped. The world looked clean again, but the ice underneath was still there, waiting for the next step to break it. I made coffee and sat in the dark, listening to the house breathe. Somewhere far away a siren rose and fell. I imagined it was heading toward her, toward whatever was left of the woman who had wanted everything. And for the first time I wondered what would be left of me when the echo finally faded. I told myself I would not go to the hospital. Then I went anyway. St. Clair's had that smell I always associate with new paint and old grief. I stood at the edge of the atrium beneath a ceiling of white glass and watched people move as if time walked differently here. Volunteers pushed carts of flowers that looked too bright for winter. A television on mute replayed a news segment about community leadership. Margot's photograph appeared in the corner of the screen for 3 seconds, her smile pressed into a neat shape. I did not ride the elevator up. I did not ask what room she was in. I sat on a bench and folded my hands in my lap and listened to the soft clatter of cups from the cafe. Nurses passed with faces like closed doors. A boy in a blue hoodie slept with his head on his mother's shoulder. Somewhere a monitor beeped like a small insistent bird. After a while I stood, crossed the lobby and bought a cup of tea. I held it until the heat left the paper and then threw it away untouched. When I stepped back outside, the air felt cleaner, as if the sky had rinsed itself while I was gone. Clara called that evening. Her voice was polished to calm. The doctors say she needs rest, she said. They want to keep her for observation. We are asking friends not to visit. I was not invited, I said. Please, she answered. And the single word carried a weight I had never heard from her. Whatever this is, let it stop here. It will stop when it has finished, I said. Things end only when they are complete. There was a long silence. I thought I heard her breathe in as if to speak, then change her mind. Thank you for answering, she said, which was not gratitude so much as surrender. The next day the snow came thick and wet, and the city became a study in white. I shoveled the walk in front of my house and thought of the first year after Ethan left for college, when I learned to clear the steps alone. The weight of the shovel felt familiar in my hands. Some burdens become a kind of muscle. At noon a courier in a dark coat knocked on my door. He held out a clipboard and a rectangular package wrapped in brown paper. For your neighbor, he said, reading the label. The address was Ethan's 2 streets over. He looked at the map on his phone and frowned. I am behind. Can you take it? Yes, I said, and sign my name. I set the parcel on my kitchen table and stared at it while the snow slid in sheets past the window. The paper had the slightly oily sheen of a copy shop mailer. On the back corner someone had pressed a thumbnail into the tape when sealing it. That small half-moon mark felt like a fingerprint made of impatience. I made tea and did not touch the package. I cleaned the sink. I wiped the stove. I folded a towel that was already square. Then I picked up the parcel and walked it through the falling snow to Ethan's door. He opened it in a sweater and old jeans, the tiredness still clinging to him like smoke. Mom, he said carefully, as if the word might break. A courier left this at my place, I said. Your address. Wrong street. He took it, stared at the label as if it might explain itself, then stepped aside. Do you have a minute? I followed him into the kitchen. It smelled of coffee and something forgotten on the burner. He slit the tape with a butter knife and lifted the flaps. Inside lay a stack of photocopies and a small black notebook bound in cardboard. He set the notebook aside and thumbed the pages. Bankruptcy dockets. Licenses. Articles of incorporation. A scan of a photo from a ribbon cutting. He turned page after page, his breath slowing, the way people breathe when they realize the room is full of smoke and the window does not open. There was no letter. No signature. Only the small notebook. He picked it up and opened to the first page. A sentence was written across the top in pencil. Accuracy matters more than speed. He read it aloud softly, as if tasting the words. Then he looked at me. You used to tell me that when I was a kid. When I rushed through homework. You said it every September on the first day of school. You wrote it on a sticky note and put it on the refrigerator so I would see it before basketball practice. I did, I said. He turned more pages. Pencil marks in the margins. A list of names, then arrows to dates, then new names. On a later page, a clipped photograph taped to the paper with neat strips at each corner. At the bottom someone had written a single line in small letters. Truth released too early becomes noise. He closed the notebook slowly, his thumb resting on the edge as if the cardboard were warm. Did you send this to me? He asked, and there was no anger in his voice, only a kind of exhausted wonder. What would you think if I had? I said. He set the notebook down as if it were fragile and sat back in the chair. For a moment he looked around the kitchen like a traveler who has returned to a city that kept his shape but not his name. Then he rubbed his eyes with his palms and laughed once without humor. I thought I was saving her, he said. I thought if I defended her hard enough the world would remember what it owed people like her. Now I am reading the bill. Bills arrive whether we open the envelope or not, I said. He looked at me again. If you did this, why send it to me now? Because you are finally listening. He stood, walked to the window and stared at the white street. When he spoke again his voice was smaller, the voice of the boy who used to ask if monsters were real. Did you ever love her? He asked. The question surprised me. Not Margot. Me. I thought of the first fever, the first broken bone, the first night he did not come home until morning. I thought of all the ways love had changed shape to fit the day. I thought of the sentence he had thrown at me like a stone, and the way my heart had responded by hardening around it. I love you now, I said. It just no longer looks like what you want. He let the curtain fall back against the glass and returned to the table. He lifted the notebook again and tucked it under the stack of copies as if covering a wound. Clara will hate me for reading this, he said. Clara will decide whom she hates when the room is full and the lights are bright. She will choose the version of herself that gets the most applause, I said. Then I softened. Or she will surprise you. People do that when the script ends. He nodded without looking up. He slid the package toward himself and closed the flaps again, but did not tape them. He pressed his palms flat on the cardboard and kept them there as if warming his hands over a fire that could not be seen. I should go, I said. He did not stop me. At the door he thanked me for bringing the parcel and almost smiled, as if gratitude had rusted from disuse. Snow feathered across my coat as I walked home. I felt lighter and heavier at once, as if I had set something down and discovered that what remained weighed more. In the kitchen I stood for a long time with my hands braced on the edge of the counter and listened to the house. Old pipes hummed. The refrigerator clicked. Somewhere a neighbor shoveled their steps and scraped metal against concrete in steady strokes. Near dusk Miles called. He did not say hello. He said he knows. He was meant to, I answered. You risk turning truth into confession, he warned. Let him wonder, I said. Wonder is a gate that only opens from the inside. That night the snow stopped and the cold snapped clean. Stars sharpened above the roofs. I lay in bed and watched the square of window darken, then lighten again with the passing of a late bus. Sleep came and went like a tide I could not predict. Just before dawn my phone buzzed with a message from Ethan. It contained no words. Only a photograph of the notebook open to the first page. The sentence written in pencil clear and patient. Accuracy matters more than speed. Beneath it he had taken a finger and drawn a single line in the dust of the table. It pointed not at the words but at the space beneath them, the place where a signature might have gone. I did not reply. I put the phone face down and watched the light come back to the room, gray and thin, and I understood that the mirror had broken for him at last. Not because he saw Margot clearly, but because he had begun to see me. The fracture was small. It would widen. The week after the notebook, the city thawed and refroze and thawed again, as if the weather could not decide which version of itself to keep. News about Margot moved in the same uncertain rhythm. One day there were statements from the firm about stability and continuity. The next day there were whispers about subpoenas and a quiet meeting with outside counsel. No one said collapse. They said transition, the way people do when they want the word to land softly. I kept my own rhythm. Library shifts. Groceries. The small rituals that keep a life from emptying out. I scrubbed the kettle until the metal remembered how to shine. I sorted a drawer that did not need sorting. I told myself that order was not punishment, only proof that I could still choose something. Ethan did not call for 3 days. When he finally did, his voice sounded as if it had been left out in the cold and brought back in too late. I read it all, he said. And there is no defense that does not make me smaller. I waited. Clara believes this will pass if we keep our heads down. Her mother will come back stronger. People respect endurance. People respect silence when it protects their comfort, I said. Endurance is a word the comfortable use to name other people's pain. He did not argue. He told me he was driving to the hospital with flowers. I pictured the bouquet. Lush. Photogenic. Chosen by a florist who never had to make a decision with the last $20. Take a card, I said. Write the truth on it. He laughed once without humor. What would that even be? That you are afraid of what it costs to be a son, I said. That love without loyalty is just etiquette. He hung up before he could thank me or accuse me. I stood at the sink with my hands under cold water until my fingers numbed and the ache behind my ribs quieted. The next day, a reporter left a note in my mailbox. The handwriting was careful and eager. He wanted a comment on background. He promised kindness. I slid the paper back into the envelope and placed it in the drawer with manuals for appliances I no longer owned. People think kindness is a currency that buys absolution. It only buys an easier interview. At the library, a boy about 7 handed me a card to replace. He told me he had dropped it in a puddle. His boots were still wet. His father stood behind him with a patient smile and a coffee that had gone cold. I printed a new card and slid it across the counter. The boy examined it like treasure, then looked up at me with the solemn joy of children who have been trusted. Thank you, he said. You are welcome, I answered and meant it. I watched them leave together and felt envy move through me like a thin blade. I did not resent the father. I resented the way the world treated their ordinary as sacred while mine had been asked to be invisible. On Friday I passed Clara on the street outside a framing shop. She was carrying 2 large pieces wrapped in brown paper and tape. She saw me and the reflex smile flickered on, then failed. We stopped because there was not enough sidewalk left to pretend we had not. How is she? I asked. Sleeping more. Talking less, she said. And you? Working. It is easier to move than to think. Ethan. He is trying to stand in 2 rooms at once, she said. It is a talent he learned from women. She did not say which women. I did not ask. She glanced at the packages in her arms. I have a show next month. Winter portraits of people who do not like winter. It was meant to be a joke. She looked down at the tape and added, I keep thinking I should change the theme to absence. There are buyers for both, I said. We stood like that for a moment, 2 women holding different weights. Then she took a breath that seemed to hurt going in. I should not say this, she began, which is what people say when they plan to. But I am going to the hospital now, and I would rather swallow the truth once than sip it slowly. She looked at me fully. If you think this will teach Ethan devotion, you are right. But if you think it will teach him how to love, you might lose him in the process. Men often confuse obedience with care. I almost said that obedience was what kept him fed and housed for 20 years. I almost said that care without consequence grows into contempt. Instead I nodded. And you? I asked, what will you learn? She smiled in a way that made her look very young. Whether I am my mother's daughter or my own person. She stepped around me and went on, her reflection breaking and reforming in each shop window as she passed. That evening Miles came by with soup and a stack of papers that did not look like victory. He ate at my table and told me what the auditors had found so far. The numbers were not crimes by themselves. They were decisions that required more decisions to survive. A life built from thin bridges across deep water. She will not go to prison for being ambitious, he said. But if ambition wears another name while signing a loan, ambition becomes fraud. And the partners? One will testify to save himself. One will remember that he loved her once and choose to forget. One will pretend he was misled and will be believed because men know how to look surprised in boardrooms. He closed the folder and placed his hand on it for a moment, as if it were a living thing that needed calming. You can stop now, he said. You have proven your point. I have not, I said. Points are for arguments. I am writing a lesson. He studied me with the care of a man measuring the distance to a cliff. Winter, he said softly, what remains after fire is not always warmth. He left the soup and not the warning. I put the papers away and washed the bowls and stood at the window until the glass fogged with my breath. The street was empty. The world had that fragile quiet it wears just before breaking again. The next morning I found Ethan sitting on my front steps with the same posture he had at 12 when he broke a neighbor's window, and could not find an apology that felt like truth. Come in, I said. He did not move. I sat beside him. The stone was cold through my coat. I am selling the second car, he said. We do not need it. If things go badly, I will have to cover some of the mess to keep Clara safe. There are people Margot owes who do not like paperwork. I can talk to a few of them, but some debts are not numbers. I listened. I used to think money solved everything, he said. Now it feels like the language that taught me not to hear. Silence settled between us, the kind that does not demand to be filled. He rubbed his palms together slowly as if trying to warm a faith that had gone thin. I am not asking you to forgive her, he said. I am not sure I can. I am asking if you can stop pulling threads. The fabric is unraveling fast enough. I looked at my hands. They were steady. The strange calm I had lived inside for weeks had not cracked. Yet I recognized the truth he brought like a cold drink pressed into a feverish hand. The fabric was unraveling. I had wanted that. I had also wanted him to watch it and learn the difference between admiration and love without drowning in the lesson. All right, I said. No new threads. He closed his eyes and breathed out, and for a second I saw the boy he had been, the boy who used to lean his head on my shoulder during bus rides home because the day had been too loud. I stood and opened the door. Come inside, I said. Eat something. He followed me into the kitchen like someone entering a chapel they once believed in. I fried eggs and put toast on a plate and set the jar of jam on the table without a spoon the way I always have. He smiled at that, a small human thing that felt like a bridge. While he ate, he told me a story about a client who had tried to pay a bill in praise. He made me laugh. The sound startled both of us. It sounded like floorboards settling after a long winter. In the afternoon he left with a container of soup and a bag of groceries I pretended I did not need. When the door closed behind him, the house returned to its own breathing. I stood for a long time in the middle of the kitchen, my hand on the back of the chair where he had sat, and tried to imagine a future that did not require anyone to win. Dusk sifted through the blinds. I had just turned on the lamp when my phone lit up with an unknown number. I almost let it pass to voicemail. Then I answered. Grandma Winter, the small voice said, careful and bright. It was Lila. Hello, I said, and my body remembered softness with an ache. Are you busy? She asked. I am here, I said. There was a rustle, the sound of a hand sheltering a phone. Mom and Nana are arguing. They argue every day. I put my bag in the closet and hid my shoes so they would not hear the door. Can I come to your house? Everything in the room stilled, even the lamp hum. I pictured her small shoes lined up in the dark, the careful planning of a child who has learned to map escape routes. Where are you? I asked. At the end of our street. It is the corner with the blue mailbox. I can see the bus stop, but I do not want the bus. Stay there, I said. Do not move. I am coming to get you. I ended the call, grabbed my coat, and stepped into the evening that smelled of iron and wood smoke. The sky had not decided between night and day. I walked fast, almost ran, past houses that had forgotten how to open their curtains. At the corner she stood with her backpack on both shoulders, like a traveler who has understood the first lesson of leaving. When she saw me, she did not cry. She reached for my hand and I gave it gladly, and we walked back together without a word. At my door she looked up at the modest wreath I keep from autumn to spring. Is this home? She asked, not unsure, only wanting to confirm the name of the place that had already begun to feel like safety. Yes, I said. Tonight it is. Lila stepped inside and stood very still, as if measuring the room for safety. I took her coat and set it over the chair. Her braid listed to one side. Her cheeks held the pink of cold air, and there was a gray smudge on her thumb from a pencil. She smelled faintly of crayons and winter. Are you hungry? I asked. A little, she said. I made grilled cheese the way I once made it for Ethan, butter to the very edges so the corners crisp. She ate carefully, as if any loud motion might invite the noise she had escaped. When the plate was empty she folded her hands, a small formal gesture that broke my heart. Do you want to tell me what happened? I asked. They kept saying my name but not to me, she said. The room felt like the alarm at school. Everyone moved, no one knew where. I put my bag by the door at lunch so I would not have to go upstairs. You plan to leave? I said. I plan to find quiet, she answered. I warmed milk with a little honey. She held the mug in both hands and breathed the steam. Her shoulders lowered. Rage is a sharp thing. It cannot hold a child. Something gentler rose in me, something older than justice. Care knows its work without speeches. We will call your father, I said. He should know you are safe. She nodded. Can I sleep here? She asked. Not the big light. The small one. You can, I said. I will leave the lamp in the corner. I called Ethan. His voice came with the sound of a room that had been arguing. Lila is here, I said. She is safe. Come in the morning. Not tonight. Is she all right? He asked. Tired, I said. She needs quiet and so do you. Tell her I love her, he said. The words sounded new in his mouth. Promised I would. I pulled out the couch, tucked a blanket near the bookcase and chose a story. A river. A girl learning how to name her own weather. Lila listened, eyes heavy, then said, almost asleep, I like rivers, they keep going even when no one watches. She slept with the lamplight thin as a ribbon across the wall. I called Miles and told him what I had done. He spoke like someone who has seen too many courts. Your shelter, he said. That is allowed. Keep notes. Times. Her words. No decoration. I wrote it all down. Then I slept in the chair near the couch and woke to the kettle. Lila sat up with hair that claimed the night. Pancakes, she asked. Her voice carried the news that morning had kept its promise. We made them. She cracked one egg perfectly and fished a sliver of shell from the next with a spoon. We ate slowly. Syrup found her mouth. I wiped it with a napkin. The gesture returned like an old song. A car door closed outside. I knew the sound of Ethan's steps on the walk. He knocked once and opened the door with permission stitched into the motion. Lila ran to him. He let out a sound that belonged to fathers. He kissed the crown of her head again and again. "Thank you," he said over her hair. "She can stay today," I said. "There is no need to return to noise. Clara is with her mother," he said. "We are not good together right now. Could Lila stay tonight too?" "If she wants to," I said. He crouched to her height. "Do you want that?" She nodded. "The lamp is nice here," she said, as if naming the measure of home. "Maybe it is." I poured coffee. He drank with both hands around the cup. Lila drew at the table with a pencil stub. A bridge. A small figure. A round balloon held by a string that bent like a smile. "What is the person doing?" I asked. "Waiting for the wind to decide," she said. Ethan looked at me. "There will be papers," he said quietly. "Lawyers, schedules, sharp words that pretend to be neutral. I do not want her in the middle." "Then step out of the middle," I said. "Ask the court for time and structure. Ask for help like a man who remembers community is not charity." He nodded. "Do you know someone who can guide me?" "I will ask," I said. "But I need one promise. If Lila stays here, this house will not host anyone's anger. No speeches against her mother. No clever jokes. She will hear calm or she will hear nothing." "I can do that," he said. "One more thing. When you stand before a judge, you will say that you trust me. You will say it as a fact, not as a tactic." He traced the grain of the table with a fingertip, the way he once traced leaves to learn how trees drink light. "I trust you," he said, trying the words on until they fit. "I trust you." Lila looked up. "I trust you too," she said. "Children understand when a vow needs a witness." I texted Miles for the name of a family attorney who prefers clarity to thunder. He sent a number and a warning. "She gives homework," he wrote. "Good," I answered. In the afternoon we walked to the park. The swings creaked. Not with sadness but with history. Lila asked for a gentle push, then a bigger one, then none at all. She jumped at the highest point and landed on her feet. We both laughed. The sound was clean like cold water. We returned by the corner where I had found her. She squeezed my hand and said nothing. Places hold echoes. It is good to pass them with softer steps. At dusk Ethan came back with a small overnight bag. He stood in the bathroom door and watched Lila line up her toothbrush like a ceremony. He did not perform. He did not ask for a script. He stood where a father stands when presence is the only currency. After she slept, we sat in the kitchen with the lamp low. "Admiration asks for applause," he said. "Love asks for presence. I have been clapping too long." "Then be present," I said. He rubbed his jaw. "Tomorrow I will ask Clara for space and a schedule. If she cannot hear it, I will let the court speak." "And if Margot calls?" I asked. He sighed, "Not the theatrical kind, the kind that empties a room. I will not take instructions from the person who taught me to ignore the one who saved me." We were quiet. The quiet felt like soil after rain. Dark. Ready. Before he left he said, "You promise no new threats. Thank you for keeping your word." I nodded. The ground was loosened. The fire had moved through. A field must be left to rest or it grows only ash. I checked on Lila one last time. The blanket had slipped to her waist. I pulled it up and smoothed her hair. Her drawing lay on the table. The bridge was bold now. The balloon drifted closer to the figure. The line between them curved like trust. I turned off the lamp and stood until my eyes adjusted. The house made its old night sounds. Somewhere outside a fox called once. Then the dark closed around the note. What remains after fire is not always ruin. Sometimes it is a clearing. Sometimes it is a child asleep under a small light, and the certainty that morning will arrive exactly as promised. The morning after Lila's first night in my house, the air had that clear brightness winter gives only when it plans to be honest with you. Ethan called early. He did not clear his throat or rehearse a tone. He said he had scheduled a consultation with the attorney Miles recommended and asked if I would come. He did not say as a witness or as a comfort. He said as yourself. I agreed. The attorney's office sat on the second floor of a brick building with a narrow staircase and a hallway that smelled faintly of lemon oil. Her door was painted a steady blue. Inside, her desk held a legal pad, a small lamp, and a dish of peppermint candies untouched enough to be ceremonial. Her name was Ruth Calder. She did not waste words. She looked at Ethan the way a surgeon looks at an X-ray, and at me the way a historian looks at a footnote that will decide a chapter. "Tell me what you want for the child," she said. "Time and calm," Ethan answered. "A routine that holds when adults fail." "Tell me what you can give," she said. "Presents," he said. "Money if needed. A home that is not a battlefield." Ruth turned to me. "And you?" "A place where the lamp is kind," I said. No speeches against her mother. No games with deadlines. Only the ordinary tools. Breakfast. Homework. Laundry folded on the first try. Ruth wrote 3 short lines and tapped the pen against the pad. "We will ask for a temporary order," she said. "Alternating weeks for now with a midweek dinner. Exchanges at a neutral location. A therapist for the parents so the child does not have to be the translator." She paused. "And a statement from you, Mrs. Lucas, about your willingness to provide care without commentary. The court prizes grandmothers who understand boundaries." "I can write that," I said. She looked at Ethan again. "There is also the matter of influence," she said. "Your mother-in-law has resources and friends. She will try to make this a social story. We will make it a calendar story. Judges like calendars. They prefer clocks to headlines." We left with a folder of forms and a list of tasks. At the curb, Ethan turned to me with the grateful awkwardness of a son relearning the shape of his mother in public. "Thank you for coming," he said. I nodded. Words would have been decoration. Lila spent that evening drawing maps. She made one of the park and one of the route between my house and hers. She labeled the corners with little images instead of street names. A blue mailbox. A lamppost with a chipped base. The bakery that smells like early morning even at noon. When she was finished, she drew a key in the margin with symbols for safety, for maybe, and for do not. "What is do not?" I asked. "The corner by the empty lot," she said. "People drop bottles there. The glass makes the ground look like it wants to bite." We taped the maps on the fridge. They made the room look like a command center for a very gentle war. The next day, Ethan moved a duffel bag into my spare room. He did not say how long he would stay. He folded shirts into the dresser with care I had not seen from him since he was a boy learning to do laundry without turning every white thing pink. At dinner, he washed the dishes without asking where the sponge was, because some knowledge never leaves you. After Lila fell asleep, he sat at the table with the forms and filled out each line as if he were stitching fabric he had finally decided to keep. He looked up once and said, "You asked me to say it as fact. I am practicing." "Say it now," I answered. "I trust you," he said, and did not look away. The days that followed were slow and precise. Ruth filed the petition. The court set a date. Ethan met with a mediator and learned the art of speaking to a calendar instead of to a wound. Clara called once to ask if Lila had eaten. Her voice was polite in the way porcelain is polite. I told her about pancakes and maps and the lamp beside the couch. She said thank you almost angrily and hung up before the thanks could turn into something that might break her posture. Margot's name still appeared on the local news scroll. Smaller now, sliding by between weather and sports. There were murmurs about regulatory inquiries and differences of reporting. There were photographs of her entering a building with dark glass and exiting another with a scarf wrapped to her eyes. I did not look away when her image crossed the screen. I watched until the letters unfurled past her like a tide pulling a boat from shore. One afternoon, as I walked home from the library, I saw her on the opposite sidewalk. No coat. Just a black sweater and that scarf, though the wind was unforgiving. She pretended not to see me. I did not call out. Halfway down the block she faltered, not a collapse, only a small refusal of her knees to continue pretending. She steadied herself with a hand on the cold stone of a storefront and then straightened. When she lifted her head, our eyes met across the street. We held the look for the span of 3 heartbeats. Then she turned the corner as if the city had been built to provide exits at the exact moment she required them. That night Ethan said he had received a message from her asking to see Lila. He asked what I thought. I told him the truth as gently as it would allow. "Love is not a performance," I said. "If she can sit beside the child and ask about her day without teaching her how to lie to herself, then yes. If she wants a photograph for later, then no." He nodded and wrote an email to Ruth asking how to arrange such a visit. He showed me before sending it. The note was clean. No blame. 3 questions. 2 proposed times. It looked like adulthood. On the evening before our first court date, A winter storm rolled in from the west with the confidence of a parade. We made soup. Lila sorted beans with the seriousness of a scientist. Ethan found the old deck of cards in the drawer near the stove and dealt 3 hands. We played quietly. I won once and pretended not to notice. Lila won twice and gloated without malice. Ethan lost with grace. When she went to brush her teeth, he stayed at the table and turned a card over and back again. If I lose tomorrow, he said, I will still do this. Wake early. Make eggs. Walk her to school when it is my turn. Call on the off days to hear about the music lesson. I will do the small work even if I am allowed very little of the time. That is not losing, I said. That is learning the proper size of a father. He looked at the card and put it down. There is something else, he said slowly. If the judge asks about the past, about loans and the way I left you to survive while I chased reflections, I will answer. I will not clean it up. I will not hire elegance to speak for me. I poured tea and let the steam fog the air between us. Then I said what I had come to believe only after months of frost. Forgiveness is not absolution. Forgiveness is letting the future have more rooms than the past. He exhaled. Then forgive me enough to let me paint one of them. In the morning the courthouse stood like a promise someone had made to order, and then forgotten to fund properly. Ruth met us at the steps with a folder and a scarf that looked like it had been knitted by a person who enjoys counting. Inside, the waiting area was full of families pretending to be temporary. The walls carried signs about respect. The benches carried the weight of sentences no judge would ever say aloud. When our case was called, the room felt smaller. The judge looked young and extremely tired. Ruth spoke with a calm that made time obey her. She presented calendars and forms and did not mention feelings. Clara's attorney spoke next. He used phrases like best interests and stability. He did not say my name. He did not need to. The judge read the papers for a long minute, and then asked if there were any additional statements. Ethan stood. His voice did not reach for anything it could not hold. He said that his mother had provided care for Lila without commentary. He said that he trusted me with his daughter, and with his own character where it touched hers. He said he was ready to learn the work of steady presence. The judge noted a few things, then set a temporary schedule that matched Ruth's request with only minor edits. He looked at us and said that the court was not a venue for vengeance and that children are not resilient in the way adults like to believe. He said it without poetry and without scold. He said it like weather. Then he banged the small block with his gavel, and the room loosened as if someone had released a belt after a hard meal. Outside, the air was bright and cold enough to make our eyes water. Ethan put his hands in his pockets and looked up at the courthouse windows as if listening for a last echo. Lila took both our hands and swung between us once, twice, 3 times, the way children rehearse flying. We walked to the corner where the light changes slowly, and I understood that the lesson I had meant to deliver had already turned into another one entirely. That night, when the house was quiet, I wrote 3 lines at the bottom of the page where I had once written to understand what makes her so perfect. Patience is an instrument. Precision is a kindness. Lessons must end. I closed the notebook and set it in the drawer. The snow outside glittered under the street lamp. I placed my hands flat on the table and felt the grain of the wood like a map I had memorized. In the next session I would say it aloud. I would tell Ethan the whole of it, not as weapon but as weather. The confession could wait one more dawn. The day after court, the snow melted fast, revealing the hard gray underneath, streets, roofs, lives that refused to stay buried. I woke early and found the kitchen full of a light that looked almost forgiving. The house felt both emptied and full. Ethan and Lila had left before dawn for breakfast at their new routine cafe, the one halfway between here and Clara's apartment. I stood at the sink and let the water run until it went from cold to warm and back again. On the table sat my old notebook. The page with Margot's name was still open, its edges curled from the heat of too many nights beside a candle. I read the last line I had written. Lessons must end. It looked final but not complete. I turned the page. The doorbell rang before I could write. When I opened it, Margot was standing there. She was thinner, paler, wrapped in a long gray coat that looked expensive but tired. The scarf was gone. Her hands, bare against the cold, trembled only slightly. Behind her, the wind lifted small shards of snow from the street like white ash. "May I come in?" she asked. I stepped aside. She entered quietly, as if the house were sacred ground she didn't expect to survive. The silence between us was an animal neither of us wanted to wake. Finally, she said, "You've done what you came to do. I'm finished." I poured tea for both of us. "Then why are you here?" She looked around the room, the lamp, the folded blanket, the drawing of the bridge still taped to the wall. "Because I needed to see the woman who dismantled me and still has a warm light in her house. To understand how you managed that." "I didn't dismantle you," I said. "You built yourself on hollow ground. I only stopped covering the cracks." She smiled faintly. "You could have let me fall quietly. But you wanted an audience." "No," I said. "I wanted my son back." She studied me, eyes sharp again. "And now I want peace. You should too." Her shoulders sagged. "Peace is not my language. I was raised to win, not to rest." "Then learn a new language," I said. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a folded envelope. "This is a statement. I'm leaving the firm. Leaving the city. I wanted you to hear it from me before the press spins it into something noble." I didn't take the envelope. "Do what you need to do." She set it on the counter. "He still loves you, you know. He told me before he stopped answering my calls." "Love and forgiveness aren't the same," I said. "You taught him that too." Her eyes flickered. "You're cruel." "I'm honest." Margot looked toward the window. "Do you ever regret it? The fire?" "Every day," I said. "But I'd rather live with ash than with rot." She nodded slowly, the kind of nod that means surrender disguised as understanding. "I think you and I were the same kind of woman once," she said. "Only you broke earlier and learned how to live after." She left before I could answer. When the door closed, the air seemed to exhale. I carried the untouched cup of tea to the sink, poured it out and opened the window. Cold air entered, sharp and new. Somewhere down the street, her car door closed, and an engine started. I didn't watch her drive away. Later, Ethan came by to drop off Lila's drawings from school. He saw the second cup on the counter and frowned. "Was someone here?" "Yes," I said. "Margot." He waited for the rest. "She said goodbye," I added. He nodded quietly. "Good. Maybe it's time we all learn to." He handed me one of Lila's papers. It was another bridge, this one with two figures standing on opposite sides waving. Between them, a sun that touched both. "She said this one's for you," Ethan said. I pinned it to the fridge right beside the first map. That night, the house felt lighter. The air hummed with something that wasn't sorrow, wasn't victory, just balance. I sat at the table with my notebook and finally wrote. Revenge was never the lesson. The lesson was how to stop needing it. I closed the book and slid it onto the shelf beside the lamp. Outside, the snow began again, soft, quiet, disciplined. When I turned off the light, the room didn't fall into darkness. It held a faint glow from the street, enough to see the outlines of what remained. The bridge, the cup, the door, all still standing. And for the first time since it began, that felt like an ending. Snow withdrew the way guilt does, slowly in patches. Days grew longer without asking permission, and the cold began to forget itself. By March, the air smelled faintly of iron and wet bark, the kind of scent that warns a city to start again. I opened my windows and let the house relearn the language of wind. Lila's laughter carried through the kitchen now like sunlight. She had started piano lessons at the community center. The instrument was slightly out of tune, but she didn't mind. She said the wrong notes made the right ones feel brave. She practiced every morning before school, small fingers finding their way through hesitation to music. Ethan would come early some days, sit on the steps, coffee in hand, listening quietly. The first few times he cried without sound. Later he only smiled. Ruth called to tell us the final papers were signed. The custody schedule was official. There would be no more hearings, no more lawyers reciting our lives like grocery lists. She said she was proud of how calm we'd stayed. I told her calm wasn't a gift, it was a practice. She laughed, said she should put that on her office wall. When the call ended, I sat for a while at the table and listened to the house. It had changed. Not larger, not smaller, just softer. The edges no longer cut. For the first time I realized that every space inside it had been touched by love. Even the quiet ones built from pain. That afternoon I walked to the park alone. The lake was thawing, the ice fracturing in long, gentle sighs. Children threw pebbles at the edges to watch the ripples. I sat on a bench and watched the reflection of trees shake themselves awake. For a moment I thought I saw Margot on the far side of the lake, wearing a dark coat, hair uncovered. But when I blinked, the shape had dissolved into shadow. Maybe it didn't matter. Some ghosts prefer to stay decent. When I came home, the mailbox held an envelope without a return address. The handwriting was elegant but unfamiliar. Inside was a single photograph. Margot standing by a seaside railing, wind in her hair, the ocean behind her bright and unrepentant. On the back she had written one line. I am learning the new language. I placed the photo in my notebook between the final pages and closed it gently. There was no need to reply. Ethan and Lila arrived just before sunset. They brought groceries and noise, the kind of noise that doesn't hurt. Lila announced that her class was planting a tree for Earth Day, and she wanted to name it something. She asked for ideas between mouthfuls of strawberries. How about promise, Ethan said. She wrinkled her nose. Too serious. Echo? I offered. She thought about it, then nodded. Echo grows, she said with conviction, as if naming it had already made it real. After dinner she practiced piano again. Ethan sat beside her, humming. I stood in the doorway and watched their silhouettes in the warm lamplight. The father steady, the child curious, the house holding them both. The notes were imperfect, but the room did not seem to care. When she finished, Lila closed the lid and said, Grandma, can we go see the ocean one day? We will, I said. Maybe this summer. Will you come too, Dad? She asked. Of course, he said. The answer came fast, no hesitation. She smiled, satisfied, and went to brush her teeth. After she was gone, Ethan said quietly, She dreams in futures now. That's your doing. I shook my head. No. It's hers. I only made space for it. He hesitated. Mom, he said. I don't know what to do with everything that happened. Some days I hate her, some days I pity her, and some days I still miss her. That's grief, I said. It doesn't mean you love wrong. It just means love changed shape. He nodded, eyes damp but not broken. I think you were right. Revenge isn't justice. No, I said. Justice is quiet. Revenge is just noise that finally burns out. We said nothing for a while. The ticking clock filled the silence. It sounded less like counting and more like breathing. Later, after they left, I cleaned the kitchen and opened the window again. The night was soft. Across the street, a neighbor's wind chime whispered in small silver syllables. Somewhere a cat leapt from one fence to another and landed without sound. I stood there for a long moment, and for the first time since this began, I felt no need to remember or rewrite or repair. I simply was. In the dark glass of the window, my reflection looked almost kind. I smiled at her and said softly, we did enough. When I turned away, the lamp's glow caught the photograph on the fridge. Lila's bridge, the balloon closer now, the string curved like joy. Beneath it, a new drawing she'd made that morning. 3 figures standing under a tree, branches reaching out as if trying to hold the sky. Outside, the wind shifted. It wasn't cold anymore. It smelled of rain, of soil ready to forgive the frost. I turned off the light. The piano, still open a crack, reflected the dim street lamp from outside. The house breathed around me. Somewhere, deep in the quiet, the faintest sound of a thawing world began again. The first rain came in the middle of the night, soft but insistent, a kind of whisper the earth had been waiting to hear. I woke to the sound of it against the window, steady, cleansing. The world was rinsing itself. For a long time I simply listened, wrapped in the rhythm. Then, without quite knowing why, I got up, made tea, and sat at the kitchen table. Outside, the streetlights turned the puddles gold. The branches swayed, unburdened. I could smell the change even through the glass, the metallic sweetness that always arrives before things start to grow again. On the fridge hung Lila's drawings. The bridge. The balloon. The 3 figures under the tree. I hadn't noticed before how she'd drawn the roots spreading outward like fingers reaching toward each other. She'd drawn them in green instead of brown. Hope disguised as fact. Children understand what adults forget. The world below is alive too. At dawn, Ethan texted a picture. Lila in her raincoat, boots in a puddle, hair wild and laughing. The caption said, she asked if puddles remember the clouds that made them. I smiled because of course she would ask that. And of course somehow they do. By afternoon the rain had thinned to mist. I walked to the library. The sidewalks were slick, the air bright with the scent of wet paper and earth. The old librarian, Mrs. Porter, waved from the counter. "Haven't seen you in a while, Winter," she said. "You look lighter." "I stopped carrying what wasn't mine," I said. She laughed softly, as if that were the best answer anyone could give. When I got home, the answering machine blinked. It was a message from Ruth. The case file had been officially closed, all records sealed. She ended with, "You did well. You all did." I deleted the message but stood there for a moment, staring at the blank screen. For the first time in years, the future did not feel like a corridor, it felt like a clearing. That evening Ethan and Lila came for dinner. We made soup and bread. While the dough rose, Lila practiced piano again, playing scales that sounded like the beginning of something rather than the middle. Between notes she asked, "Grandma, what happens when stories finish?" I looked at her hands poised above the keys. "The good ones," I said, "don't finish. They change shape." She considered this seriously. "So they keep going, just quieter?" "Yes," I said. "Quieter but truer." After dinner we walked outside. The air was still cool but soft now. The trees had begun to bud, tiny green fists unfolding. Lila ran ahead, jumping from one dry patch to another, declaring each as a safe island. Ethan and I followed slower. He carried her old rain boots slung over one shoulder. "I had a dream about Dad last night," he said suddenly. He was fixing the fence in the backyard. I asked if he needed help. He just smiled and said, "You're finally learning where to put the nails." Then he went back to work. "Dreams are teachers," I said. He nodded. "You taught me that too, in your own colder way." I smiled faintly. "Cold preserves, Ethan. Warmth revives. There's a season for both." He looked at me then, the kind of look a grown son gives his mother when both have survived each other. "I'm sorry it took me this long to see you." "It takes everyone time," I said. "Seeing is easy. Understanding is work." We walked the rest of the way in silence, the kind that needed no fixing. When we reached the corner, Lila turned and called back to us. "Come on. The moon is walking fast tonight." We looked up. She was right. Clouds moved quickly across the pale light, reshaping it again and again. When they left later that night, I stood at the door and watched their car until the taillights curved out of sight. The street was quiet except for the rain beginning again, a gentler repeat of the morning's song. I closed the door and let the sound follow me into the house. The lamp cast a small halo across the room. I sat at the table, opened my notebook one last time and wrote 3 sentences. The past is a closed window. The future is the air that moves through the cracks. And love, when it survives the fire, smells like rain. I closed the book for the final time. No vow. No revenge. No ghosts. Just a woman, a room, and the sound of a world returning to itself. Outside, spring continued. The puddles gathered light. And somewhere beyond my walls, a child laughed in her sleep, proof that the story had not ended at all, only turned its page.